There's a story we don't tell enough. The story of men, silence, and the things they survive but never name. It hides in banter, in jokes that sting a little too much, in the spaces between what's said and what's swallowed. And every time we look away, another man learns to pretend he's fine. But silence doesn't heal. It lingers. It hardens into habit, into anger, avoidance, control. When we don't talk about male sexual abuse, we pass that silence down like inheritance. It touches relationships, fatherhood, intimacy, and identity. Today, I want to look at that silence, not as a therapist, but as someone trying to understand what keeps it alive and what it would mean to finally break it. It's Wednesdays. Hello, 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 hello. Okay, that was too many hellos. Hello, gay straights, the in-betweens, and the beautifully curious. Welcome back to yet another episode of Wednesdays with Woody, where we are interrupting your regularly scheduled, reflective, slightly chaotic Wednesday to bring you some truth, tenderness, and a little perspective on this wild world we live in. Today's episode, The Silence of Men, is one of those conversations that sits heavy but needs to happen. We're talking about why men struggle to speak about sexual abuse, how culture shapes that silence, and what it means for masculinity when pain becomes taboo. I'm not a survivor, and this is not a therapy session, but it's a space for reflection, to explore, to question, and hopefully to understand a little more about what silence costs us. Let's jump right in. One of the most damaging myths out there is that when men are sexually assaulted, it's usually by gay men. That idea has been baked into our culture, from the media we've consumed growing up to the jokes that still circulate today. But research tells a different story. Organizations like RAINN and the studies in the Journal of Interpersonal Violence show that the majority of perpetrators of sexual violence, regardless of the victim's gender, identify as heterosexual male. That doesn't mean queerness equals danger. It shows that abuse is about power, not orientation. This myth has survived because it's easier to blame queerness than to confront how entitlement and domination exist within straight masculinity. It's a form of cultural deflection, one that protects the system rather than its victims. If we look at history, the stereotype isn't new. Media in the 1950s and 60s often labeled sexual offenders as deviants, a word commonly associated with homosexuality. Hollywood followed this narrative. Think of the villains coded as queer in films like Psycho or Cruising. Even in later decades, tabloid media blurred sexuality with danger. Meanwhile, real abuse happening in churches, schools, and sports programs went underreported or ignored because the perpetrator didn't fit the stereotype. Legally, the system mirrored that bias. For decades, rape laws in the US and the UK defined rape exclusively as something that would happen to women. When male survivors came forward, police and courts often questioned their sexuality rather than their consent. It reinforced the idea that being a victim made you less of a man. Culturally, we've just been uncomfortable with male vulnerability. It's simpler to imagine monsters that live far away, others who harm, than to face what happens close to home. But abuse is about power, access, and silence. And when we confuse queerness with danger, we protect the very system that breeds harm. Every time this myth goes unchallenged, another survivor learns to stay quiet. When men do come forward, they often hit a wall of disbelief. According to some statistics and reports in some parts of the world, about 1 in 10 rape victims are male. Yet most never report their assault, not because it didn't happen, but because they assume no one will believe them. In 2019, the BBC interviewed several male survivors. One described being told by police officers, "Come on mate, men don't get raped." Another said friends laughed when he confided in them. These reactions aren't outliers. They reflect a wider culture that still equates masculinity with invulnerability. We raise boys to equate strength with silence, to be stoic, to never flinch. So when a man says, "something happened to me," it disrupts the script. People often respond with disbelief masked as curiosity. "Why didn't you fight back?" Or "How could you let that happen?" Every question is a quiet accusation. A 2020 report by the Male Survivors Partnership found that more than half of men who sought help felt dismissed or disbelieved by professionals. Disbelief isolates. It tells men their pain is inconvenient, their story is too complex for comfort, and when disbelief becomes habit, it teaches an entire culture that silence is safer than truth. Shame is one of those emotions that lives deep in the body. It's that tension in your chest, that voice that says, "Don't tell anyone." For many men, it's not just emotional, it's cultural. Organizations like 1 in 6 note that male survivors often wait decades before disclosing their abuse. Shame convinces them that speaking up means weakness or complicity. Psychologists describe shame as both physical and psychological. It makes the body smaller, shoulders tight, eyes down, voice careful. Over time, that posture becomes part of the identity. Straight men worry about what being assaulted says about them. Gay men fear their trauma will be twisted into stereotype. Either way, shame isolates. You can see shame play out in everyday life. The man who jokes too quickly, the friend who hides behind work, the partner who keeps a safe emotional distance. Shame doesn't vanish. It mutates. It turns tenderness into risk, touch into confusion, and when left unspoken, it's passed down, shaping how future generations learn to express love, trust, and grief. Then there's the system, the places that should protect people but don't. Churches, fraternities, military bases, sports teams. Environments built on hierarchy, reputation, and silence. A 2021 inquiry by the UK's Independent Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse found that male victims were significantly less likely to be believed by institutions. The reasoning was familiar. Men are strong, men don't get hurt. The expectation of resilience becomes a wall, one that hides abuse and rewards silence. We've seen it everywhere. The Catholic Church scandals, the Larry Nassar case in US gymnastics, university hazing that crosses into assault. Each shows how institutions protect power over people. Whistleblowers get punished. Survivors are told to stay quiet for the good of the group. Even law enforcement has been guilty of dismissal, telling survivors not to ruin a good man's reputation. Systemic silence works like this. Disbelief at the bottom, denial in the middle, and damage control at the top. It's not just policy, it's culture. And it won't change until people within these systems refuse to protect that silence. Silence has consequences. Research published in Psychology of Men and Masculinity found that unprocessed trauma in men is linked to depression, addiction, and suicidal thoughts. But beyond data, are the everyday consequences. The father who struggles with affection, the friend who jokes through pain, the colleague who hides exhaustion behind bravado. These aren't flaws, they're learned defenses. When a culture normalizes silence, it ripples outwards. Families inherit emotional distance. Children learn that love must be restrained. Workplaces become arenas where vulnerability feels like failure. Silence shapes communities into places where empathy feels awkward and care feels weak. You see it in how we talk about grief or illness, the urge to laugh it off, to keep it light. But pain doesn't dissolve when ignored. It spreads. It becomes collective numbness, the slow erosion of intimacy and connection. When we tell men to man up, we're not building resilience. We're teaching disconnection. And disconnection kills quietly. It isolates in addiction, in despair. So where do we go from here? Perhaps it starts with redefining strength. Strength rooted in empathy and accountability. The kind that listens instead of deflects, that protects without dominating. Positive masculinity lives in small moments. It's the friend who checks in when something feels off, the dad who says I was wrong, the colleague who steps back to make space, the partner who listens without rushing to fix. Those small gestures rewrite culture. They show that care and courage can coexist. This isn't about replacing toughness with softness. It's about balance. It's about knowing that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to face it. It's learning that asking for help doesn't make you less of a man. It makes you more of a human being. Healing isn't a destination. It's a daily practice. Every time a man chooses honesty over hiding, compassion over control, he extends what masculinity can be: real, nuanced, and whole. If you've carried something heavy in silence, you don't owe the world your story, but you do owe yourself some peace. Speaking up doesn't always mean going public. It might be writing it down, telling a friend, or contacting a support service. What matters is breaking the isolation. We need to challenge language that normalizes violence, call out jokes that make light of assault, encourage honest discussion in workplaces, classrooms, and families about what healthy masculinity looks like. Teachers, coaches, and mentors can model empathy and accountability. Leaders can build trauma-informed cultures that protect survivors instead of reputations. This isn't about saving people, it's about believing them, holding space for their stories, and building a culture where silence is no longer the default. If this episode left you thinking, take a breath. Let it sit. Discomfort is often the start of empathy. I'm Woody Woods, and thank you for listening, for caring, and for being part of this space. Love, light, and happiness until we meet next week. Ciao.